Okay, I took one for the team and I watched Leave the World Behind a second time. Clearly, there is so much more to life than watching these movies trying to pick out the subconscious programming, and accordingly, I would never recommend that this is the kind of thing that you spend your time doing. However, given the importance of this movie to the Great American Eclipse, I figured I better go through and look at it one more time and just see what sticks out, if anything. Now that I have a little bit more information about these eclipses and everything associated with them. The first thing that I noticed is every single line and every single scene is very intentional. This is always the case in every movie, but in this one, there's meaning under the surface of every line and every scene. It's very symbolic in that way. But when you're not aware that there is subconscious programming taking place, consciously, you just perceive the dialogue and the scenes as a movie. You're not thinking that it's showing you anything else. It would be better if I could go through all of the scenes and show you them as moving pictures to understand what I'm saying, but obviously I can't do that on YouTube or it would be a copyright strike to just show a movie. So I have a bunch of screenshots that I'm going to get into, and hopefully that'll do a similar thing as it relates to understanding what I'm saying. But just know that it's not the same as it would be if I could actually show the scenes and go through them. Anyways, without burying the lead, I wanted to show this screenshot first from a scene in Leave the World Behind where a door is opened onto a character sleeping, which then allows light to come through and highlight the bed frame of the bed. And next to it here, I have the August 21st, 2017 eclipse that took this path, the April 8th, 2024 eclipse that took this path, and then the October 14th annular solar eclipse that took this path and made an X down here with the April 8th, 2024 eclipse. And if you compare these two images, you can see that it's pretty clearly showing the X here that these two eclipses make, and then the second X that the 2017 and 2024 eclipses make. And it even has the rounded shape of the eclipse paths that you usually see on all of the eclipse maps. While this one is more rigid in terms of the paths and the lines that they make, at least over the land. That is the United States and Mexico here. And the light from the door is very intentionally showing these two X's here, for lack of a better term, evoking that idea of, hey, yes, the sun will be eclipsed in these events, and these eclipses relate to what I'm showing you in this film. Which, of course, is a cyber attack that is destroying the United States of America, or symbolically turning it into something else. It just so happens that the very next line, it's weird we're not hearing any cicadas tonight. That's an interesting line to just be randomly put into a movie because most of the time cicadas are in hibernation. They're not out making noise. But in the context of what's going on during the Great American Eclipse, this line is very intentionally put into the next scene when it cuts away from here because of what's going on with cicadas in 2024. And I'm sure those of you paying attention to the news are aware of this, where you have these two broods of cicadas coming out in 2024 in a very rare event. These particular broods only synchronize every 221 years. And it's fascinating that it's a double brood of cicadas coming out when there's this double eclipse happening that makes the X over southern Illinois where the two paths cross. And remember that 221 years ago was 1803, which was right in the aftermath of 1776 in the context of the United States of America's history and its founding, leading up into the ratification of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. 1803 is embodying that period when the country itself was founded. And 220 years later, you have these two cicada broods emerging together as this great American eclipse ritual destruction of America is taking place. Which is likely coincidence, but symbolically they can use it as a part of the subconscious programming, which is why that is the next line of dialogue directly after this scene, referencing the Great American Eclipse. And it's actually really interesting because the two broods are referred to as the Northern Illinois brood and the Great Southern brood. And that really is evoking this imagery of Abraham Lincoln and the original Civil War. Lincoln being from Illinois and adding the North into it, and then the Great Southern brood. This idea of the North and the South being divided and going to war. This year marks a once-in-a-lifetime event in the mysterious world of periodical cicadas, the simultaneous emergence of two separate broods in the U.S., a rare phenomenon that last occurred in 1803. One of the greatest enigmas of the insect world, periodical cicadas live up to 99.5% of their lives underground as nymphs, feeding on tree root sap. Some broods wait 13 years to become adults, others wait 17 years. The dual emergence of these two broods in 2024 marks a rare occasion of their 13 and 17-year life cycles synchronizing. This exciting double event won't happen again until 2245. The Northern Illinois brood and the Great Southern brood, right? As the April 8th, 2024 eclipse takes this path and the 2017 eclipse took this path. Now, as I said, the scenes are very intentional. And that scene starts with them talking about cicadas, but then it moves into him telling the story about how he left a person that he found on the road behind. And then he starts speculating on what might be going on, an occupation or something along those lines. And then the next scene is a bunch of flamingos randomly being in their pool. And they're both just looking at these flamingos like, what is going on? And the flamingo is very interesting symbolically because of the relationship between Leave the World Behind and the new Wonka film that was released 7 days later in December of 2023 as well. Where Willy Wonka, as depicted by Timothée Chalamet, has this relationship with flamingos throughout the whole film. And in Leave the World Behind, there's a line at the end where a character says, the animals, I think they're trying to show us something. Meaning symbolically in these films, the animals represent something that is subconsciously relaying a message. And the deer are doing it in Leave the World Behind mostly, but then there's this random scene of flamingos. And I think that's a tie-in to what the flamingos relate to with Willy Wonka, and the actor playing Willy Wonka also playing the main character in Dune, which is all about this Messiah programming and the idea being put into your mind that the Messiah is going to bring world peace. The Messiah is going to overthrow the old world order. Obviously, their version of the Messiah that is being depicted is not what everyone thinks it is. This is something much different. What they are showing you in these films, and they have the flamingos in Wonka alluding to Leave the World Behind's flamingo scene as the new Messiah narrative plays into the whole ritual in general. The Great American Eclipse, the ritual destruction of America, is a part of the new Messiah ritual, the new savior ritual that will take place in the Middle East at some point in time if they get their way. And I have not seen Dune yet, but there is an Eclipse scene in that film that is tying everything together as it relates to this Messiah programming, played by Timothée Chalamet, who also plays Wonka, which is a story along those lines as well. What does he do? He overthrows the chocolate elites as a part of the plot of the film. And he has this relationship to flamingos throughout the whole thing. And I get into all of that just to show you how these narratives are interwoven throughout all of the films in a very intentional way to evoke these themes in your mind without your knowledge so that you subconsciously consent to it via your silence. But anyway, let's start getting through these screenshots. Oh, well, speaking of, this is a screenshot from Wonka with the flamingos in the scene. And there are many different scenes along these lines. One of them is very interesting where they pan up past a clock and then they show flamingos flying across the sky and then they show the moon as the sky turns dark, which again gives you that moon eclipse, Donald Trump ritual destruction of America resonance as it relates to the production of their Messiah. Those who would facilitate that type of thing. For those of you who don't know, they say that the new Messiah will bring world peace. And looking at the events all around us, we can see how, well, they're going to take a really roundabout way to achieve quote-unquote peace that involves a lot of not peace. But somehow through this whole thing, they have convinced themselves that there will be some kind of savior for them that will create peace for them. That doesn't have any relationship to us. That's the thing you have to keep in mind with this whole thing. But that gets back to the relationship between the moon and water and how water is playing a role in this ritual as well, relating back to Matthew Perry, who of course was in Friends, and a big part of the plot in Leave the World Behind is discussing Friends and the last one, the last episode that one of the characters is trying to watch. And indeed, in the scene where they show this eclipse imagery, the character who wants to see the finale of Friends is talking about Friends in the scene. And October 14th, 2023 was only 14 days before Matthew Perry died in that hot tub on a lunar eclipse as well. The October 14th eclipse was a solar eclipse, and then the lunar eclipse came October 28th on the day when Matthew Perry died in a hot tub, and he had all of that moon and Batman imagery on his Instagram in the week leading up to that ritual event. So because of that aspect of it, in combination with Donald Trump, the lunar moon child, born on a blood moon, that water moon imagery is all throughout the films and programming that is designed to subconsciously infuse those ideas into your mind, which is why we can see it in Leave the World Behind and Wonka, and I'm sure Dune as well. But the other time in Wonka where they show flamingos is when they're at the zoo feeding a giraffe, trying to get it to produce milk, and they leave, and there's this magic depicted where Wonka, Timothée Chalamet's character, grabs a bunch of balloons and is lifted up into the air, as if to say, hey, this is our Messiah ascending towards the throne. And he is flanked on all sides by flamingos as this transpires. So along those lines, there is this scene in Leave the World Behind with the flamingos randomly in the pool trying to tell you something, trying to tell you how the flamingos will be related to the larger ritual, where Leave the World Behind is more focused on the American destruction aspect of the ritual. And this is where I said it would be so much easier if I could actually show the film, because I'm forgetting what scene comes directly after this, and it's very important because all of these scenes intentionally follow in a very logical way. but maybe I'll remember it as we go here. This is one of the first scenes of Leave the World Behind. Obviously, it starts by showing the Earth and the sun in space. And then you have this scene here showing you New York with One World Trade Center and the Statue of Liberty, the sun rising, and the moon up here. Setting the scene, as it were, for what this film will subconsciously relate to. Meaning these eclipses in the context of the United States of America and the quote-unquote Great American Eclipse. And I should say before going forward, this is just my impression of all of this. I'm not saying I know what the director intended. They're way above my head as it relates to these things. So they know things symbolically in a way that I never will because they're intentionally doing it. So I'm sure I'm wrong about certain things or I'm missing the mark about certain things. For example, that Wonka Leave the World Behind Dune Flamingo stuff. Which is to say, don't take this as if I figured something out. This is all speculation. And I don't want you to think that I'm presuming that I know what they're saying here or that I know what these directors are doing because they're above my head in so many ways. But anyway, that disclaimer aside, let's keep going here. Oh, this is the beginning, which is important symbolically in terms of what they're showing you. There is a scene much later in the movie where they have this red screen with part 3, the noise. And this is where that frequency is beamed somehow into all of the characters' ears. And it's very piercing and drives them insane, basically. They all grab their heads and it breaks glass. It's a very powerful frequency that is just referred to here as the noise. And that is fascinating too, how there's a line at some point in the movie where one of the characters refers to the Havana syndrome, where the frequency is affecting people. And there was just that 60 Minutes report linking Russia to Havana syndrome as all of this is unfolding leading up to the April 8th, 2024 eclipse. But I want you to pay attention to how the whole screen here goes red, and leading up to this red screen, they show Julia Roberts' character flashing in and out of the red screen. And the only other time that you see a red screen like this is in the beginning of the film that I just had up here, where they're playing a song in the intro and showing all of this imagery. I just randomly chose the flamingos, sort of in this Fibonacci spiral in the beginning, with the lyric, "This is a rude awakening, kick in the door." And you could relate that back to what I was just saying about how the character opens the door, the sun comes through metaphorically and shows those eclipse paths via the bed frame, as it relates to what they have programmed into these eclipses via media being some kind of rude awakening that is kicking in the door, right? You can see that symbolically, given that the next scene at the pool is the flamingos. But along those lines, you got to see how a lot of the lyrics to the song in the intro are kind of telling the story of what's going on here. The song was very intentionally chosen. And then more broadly, this song is an example of the noise. The song is an example of how they program minds with mind control that they put into music. And this song is a great example of that. It really gets at the idea of frequencies being used along these lines. In addition to broader characterizations relating to sonic weaponry that would result in things like Havana syndrome. This is another scene from the introduction where you have the upside down American flag, a sign of distress. And what is the lyric from the song that comes across? They say success is the best revenge. Meaning, in terms of their symbolic ritual, destruction of the United States of America, as depicted in this film and the Great American Eclipse, success is their revenge, right? And it's embodying this upside down American flag here. And then there's this other line from the song, when I am done at the scene, I won't leave anything, which is referring to a crime. And the director is telling you that's what he's doing. He's committing a mental crime. And when he's done, he's not going to leave any obvious trace of that. You'll just view it as a movie. Oh, that was a fun movie. Okay. And then you go on about your day. Because when he's done at the scene of the crime, which is the film, he didn't leave anything obvious to the conscious mind along those lines. And then similarly, in this scene, you have, you won't even know who was involved in terms of the lyrics and what I was just getting into. You won't even know who did it, right? You'll just think I'm a director. You'll just think I'm innocently making art. But he's very clearly telling you in the way he synced up the lyrics with this opening credit scene, what is going on if you pay attention. And that is overt in the way that you connect the lyrics to the scenes that he's showing you, but then it's also subconscious in the way that the noise relates to frequency. And it just so happens to be the credit scene where it's the music by notation. You won't even know who was involved. Then this is right at the start of the movie where the character who's obsessed with Friends is watching the second to last episode. And you have the very intentional Masonic checkerboard shorts that the other character is wearing in this scene right next to the screen where the line is, yeah, sorry boys, this ride's closing. Meaning the United States of America. Yeah, sorry, this empire is over. This is the ritual destruction of America. Leave the world behind. Which is the first line of the film relating to Julia Roberts' character talking about the place they rented. Oh, they said it was a place you could leave the world behind. That's where they're headed, to leave the world behind. In other words, that's where the viewer is headed subconsciously. You're going to leave the world behind. Both literally, as it relates to what films do to distract you, which is kind of the Friends theme relating through the whole movie, but then also through our subconscious sorcery and what we have play out in the world in general, you're going to be leaving the world behind eventually here. Sorry, boys, the ride's closing. But yes, it's also how, just like I'm doing right now, we use these films and the larger media apparatus to distract ourselves and detach from the world that is all around us. And that's all a part of the agenda too, right? Getting us sucked into screens so that we don't pay attention to what's going on in the world or do anything that would get in the way of what they want to see transpiring. This is the scene where they first enter the house that they rented, and it's just a really interesting scene for a lot of different reasons. Most notably the fact that the clock is set to 11:16, which is 9/11, obviously, and that ties in the second leg of the 9/11/2001 ritual that is the Great American Eclipse. Having the clock set to 11:16 there subconsciously associates this film with that ritual because that's what it's designed to do. At the same time that you have this painting of a bunch of eyes and a metaphorical screen door, as in the monolith screen door. Not a screen porch door that would, keep bugs out. This is more of the music relationship to the scenes where they play this R&B song as she's walking up the stairs, ascending to the next level. And the lyrics are, you belong to me. Yes, you do, baby. This is saying how subconsciously we are programming you to belong to Satan, quote unquote. You belong to me. Now, the conscious viewer, when they're watching this, has no idea what's going on. They're not even connecting dots in that way. But that is what's being put into your mind. You belong to me. And your mind subconsciously is thinking, yes, I do. I'm watching your film and I have no idea what's going on. Yes, I belong to you. Go ahead. Show me more. I don't know if I should be laughing at that, but I do find the humor in it because it's so absurd. Where are we? What's going on? And then as she's walking across the windows after she gets upstairs, what's the next line in the song? Never gonna let you go away. Do you see how that's related to the line I was just referring to? And then this is the first time they show this picture of water or the ocean, however you want to view it. And the waves are very calm. And as the film progresses and gets more and more crazy, this painting changes. And the waves get bigger and bigger and more out of control. Which again ties back into the moon-water relationship and the water aspect of this whole ritual. Because of the role of the moon in it and the moon's relationship to water. Speaking of the frequency theme, this was a really interesting scene in the beginning of the movie, right before they go to the beach, where the White Lion ship crashes onto the shore. And I hope you see how this is very similar to a record player and the needle coming onto the record to play it. Does that make sense? How this looks like a record and a player? Getting back to the idea of the frequency and how the noise plays a role in this plot. This scene isn't put in here because it looks cool. This isn't an accident. No, he is showing you something with this scene as it relates to frequency. Also, this down here is very similar to a power button, which is getting at the whole blackout cyber attack idea. So you have the power going out in the context of frequency and how the ritual destruction of America relates to frequency in the context of the film. And then this is just a picture of the White Lion coming onto the beach. And that, of course, is fascinating in relationship to the Francis Scott Key Bridge destruction that resulted from a giant cargo ship plowing into it, which has a literal white lion mascot that is half lion and half fish. So you have this literal white sea lion resonance going on with that ship in Baltimore. And then going further, as I got into in the Francis Scott Key Bridge video, you have the Singapore connection and its flag with the Eclipse imagery and the Pentagon, Baltimore and Washington, D.C. being very close together, and just in general, Washington, D.C. being associated with America. So you have that symbolic destruction of America possibly being referenced here in a roundabout way, in a very, very subconscious way. Oh, this is, again, that clock set to 11:16. It's actually right in between 11:16 and 11:17. But it has this upside down smile face on the clock. I mean, am I the only one seeing this? Where you have this upside down smiley face, 11:16. And then at the same time, you could view this as the sun and the moon and the eclipse imagery. And incidentally, this looks a lot like that fermata image in music theory going back to the frequency. So there's just so much being shown here in this one image that they pan to for a brief second, if even a second. Oh, and then this is more of the nuclear explosion resonance in this film where Ethan Hawke's character is wearing a Bikini Kill t-shirt, and he has this line where he says, Archie'd sleep through the atom bomb. And they are talking about blackouts and just figuring out maybe what's going on in this opening scene of the movie. But obviously, for those of you who remember history, it was the Bikini Atoll test that was related to the original creation of the atom bomb. And then you have the Baltimore connection to the atom bomb through the Sum of All Fears And then how that ties into the Dark Knight Rises nuclear bomb terrorist attack scene, the 322, and the relationship to the nuclear device that is detonated at the end of that film, given how the 322 Crocus Tenet shooting tied into the window in time during the lead up to the lunar eclipse when this all transpired, March 22nd to March 26, 2024. On top of the fact that Oppenheimer, which was Christopher Nolan's latest film, focused on the creation of the atom bomb and won the Oscar just prior to all of that going down. So you have this weird nuclear bomb resonance to all of this stuff going on as it relates to the ritual destruction of America and everything that Christopher Nolan programmed into his films along those lines. And then just a brief similar reference here with the Bikini Kill shirt and the atom bomb reference. And Julia Roberts is wearing this robe that has this Eclipse sun imagery to it as well at the same time. While she has this red line that is kind of relating to the idea of frequency, right? Which is getting at that idea that I was talking about where you have this frequency theme throughout the whole film, the noise, and then you have all these examples of how the music is being used to show you something in the scenes, and then there's this eclipse imagery in the context of that frequency and Bikini Kill. This is a picture of the house, and they have this picture here where they show the United States of America divided into red and blue, which is obviously very symbolic of what's going on in the country, what their programming does to everybody in terms of politics. But there's a very fascinating scene that features this painting. First, I bring it up to note that in this scene, you have these two lights that have X stands that they sit on. And this picture right here is that divided America picture, the red and blue United States of America, where you have the screen shining back onto that picture at the same time that this lighting is showing you the two X's. Which again goes back to potentially this imagery in the film of the two X's that the three eclipses make. In the context of the subconscious programming that's coming through the screen. And interestingly, right after they show that, we get the first image of what is going on, the cyber attack across the country. Oh, this was just an interesting scene that I wanted to show where the way these chairs are set up and the way it's shot, it really looks like a piano, the black keys and the white keys in a piano. Going back to the frequency idea. Okay, so this is the scene not too long after that where the character who wants to watch Friends and see the finale finds all of these deer in the woods and is just kind of staring out into them. Now, going back to the line that talks about the animals showing something, you got to remember that the 2024 April 8th eclipse will enter Mexico in a town that is literally called the Land of Deer. And then it exits the United States of America out of Maine in a town called Caribou. Meaning there is all this deer resonance in this film to that eclipse, which is getting at the idea of, hey, this is the subconscious programming that we have scripted into everything as represented by the deer. And the characters just stare at the deer throughout this film and don't know what to make of it. There's one line in the beginning where Ethan Hawke's character says something along the lines of, oh, well, deer are considered a good omen according to Mesoamerican history or something along those lines. But other than that, the characters are always just staring at the deer and don't know what to make of it. And at one point, the character who says that she wants to watch the finale of Friends, the daughter, hey, the deer are trying to show us something. Meaning the deer in this film and the way the characters interact with them is the idea that, yes, if we knew what it represented, it would be trying to show us something. If we had the eyes to see it, in other words. But these characters in this film don't. They don't have the eyes to see what it is, so they just stare at it like it's something they don't know what to do with. And that's very clearly shown at the end of the film, which I'll get to when I get there, relating to how Julia Roberts' character and the other character, I can't remember her name, it's something like Myhala, who incidentally was born April 6, 1996. Probably part of the reason why she was chosen for the role. But her character says something similar about the animals trying to show us something, and then they're both standing in front of the deer, and they go crazy. When all these deer are just staring at them, not saying anything, not being aggressive, just looking at them, and they start going crazy and screaming at them. And in the context of all the other scenes that are going on, it's showing how they create chaos. We react to the chaos. We go nuts. And they're just sitting there looking at us. It really reminds me of the Eyes Wide Shut scenes, where they're in their robes with masks, just staring at people who aren't supposed to be there. And that's kind of what it's evoking in me when I look at those deer, thinking about what it represents and how they're just staring at the characters and the characters are going nuts. But I'll get further into that when I get to those pictures. Anyway, this is the scene where the daughter of Ethan Hawke and Julia Roberts' characters is staring at these deer. And the very next scene is the camera panning in a way where it shows the picture of the divided United States upside down, right? Going back to the beginning and the credit scene where they show the upside down flag, which is a distress signal. So connect the dots there. They show the deer in the context of where this April 8th eclipse will enter Mexico and leave the United States of America. Also remembering it enters America through Eagle Pass and leaves Canada through Newfoundland or Labrador, Sirius 911, the Dog Star. The whole path and the towns that it enters and exits through is resonating with some symbolic theme along these lines. I think the town in Mexico that it exits is Black Stone or something along those lines, which has all kinds of alchemical relationships. But the idea here is the deer represent all of this programming and scripting that is relating to the Great American Eclipse. The character sees the deer, and then the very next scene is the upside down United States of America. A United States of America in distress, which is what this ritual destruction of America is designed to achieve. And it's being very literally shown in this film as it relates to a cyber attack that is designed to collapse the country from within. But it's also metaphorical in the sense that this is only a movie, and how it will play out in the real world will most likely be somewhat different than it's portrayed in the film. A lot of it is symbolic. A law passed against hate speech that infringes against the First Amendment in some way, shape, or form would be very symbolic of something like this. So it doesn't have to be an actual shooting civil war, if you catch my drift. It can be more symbolic and working in the realm of the mind in how it influences people to believe things that allows a law like that to be passed. That symbolically is the destruction of the United States of America as it existed or as it was founded. And then the very next scene after that is the shot of her under that painting with her 96 tattoo. And the United States has a very big Masonic tradition, and the 6'9" is on the top of the Royal Arch in Masonry. Alluding to that in a sort of chain of logic where you have the deer as it relates to the ritual destruction of America, the Great American Eclipse, the upside down picture, and then the 96. sort of the signature of the people who created it and those who will destroy it. Even though, of course, masonry is just one arm of the octopus, as it were. And then, like I said, the next scene after that is a picture of Julia Roberts and her ex-son Eclipse symbolism. Though, of course, you could view it like the octagon shape that it kind of is, the 8-sided shape, which has resonance to CERN and its relationship to the 3-body problem and the White Rabbit and all of those things along those lines, plus the fact that CERN has become a part of the news cycle leading up to the April 8th, 2024 eclipse. But again, that's one of those things that you could take an octagon to mean 100 different things, and I'm not going to assume I know what the director implied by putting it right here, other than the X in the middle, and how this looks a lot like Walmart's old logo, which was the sun in a shape like this. This is the display in the car that Ethan Hawke's character is driving, and you can see the clock is set to 12:15 and the radio is set to 16:19. And now that I'm seeing this image, I'm realizing that I never explained the relevance of the flamingos, Wonka, and Leave the World Behind. I mean, I explained it in terms of the Messiah programming that Timothée Chalamet is embodying. But the importance of the 12:15 and why I even made that connection in the first place, other than there were flamingos, obviously, in both films, was the fact that Wonka was released in the United States on December 15th, 2023, or 12:15. And actually, if you go look, Wonka was released in the United Kingdom on December 8th, which was the same day that Leave the World Behind was released on Netflix. And then 7 days later, 12/15, it had its theatrical release in the United States. Now, like I said, I could be completely making that up. Maybe there is no 12:15 connection between the two, at least as it relates to the time that the digital clock says it is here. But considering the flamingo relationship, this seems like more than just a coincidence that the clock is set to 12:15 and Wonka was released on that day. As it relates to the 1619, nothing particular sticks out to me there, which doesn't mean there isn't anything to it. It's just I'm not aware of anything specific along those lines, other than maybe you could say 1.618 is the golden ratio, and this is 1.619, which is just a little bit off from that. And Barack Obama signs his last name, the O, with the phi symbol, or the golden ratio. And obviously, the Obamas were given executive producer credits through their production house on this film. Maybe it has a relationship along those lines, but other than that, I don't know. Although the director claims that he went to Obama to get notes on how certain aspects of a cyber attack might play out in reality, I doubt that he was actually very involved in the film at all. But they very purposefully associated the Obamas with this film because of what they were going to encode into it, so that they could lump it into the usual R versus D stuff that goes on in the United States, which you could see in particular after the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, where the media, as usual, was pointing to controlled opposition conspiracy theorists and what they were saying about all of this on the internet, and pointing out, hey, if you hear people saying Leave the World Behind predicted this, that's the kind of thing that these domestic terrorist conspiracy theorists are saying on the internet. They're taking this tragedy and using it as an excuse to provide misinformation like they always do. And in that way, because the Obamas are associated with the film, it just seems like, oh, hey, this is more of that racist conspiracy theorist element of the internet coming after a film that the Obamas were involved in. They say that they're all communists. They say that they're involved in pedophilia, like that fake Pizzagate thing, and QAnon has been going on about. See, this is all just the usual stuff that happens when this kind of thing comes out. They're just making stuff up, and they're doing it for political reasons because they've been saying all of this not true stuff about the Democrats and the Obamas, and on it goes. That's why they associated the Obamas with this film, given what it was going to encode about the truth of the Great American Eclipse and the ritual destruction of the United States of America. Because for a long time, mainstream figures on the conservative right have been shouting from the rooftops that Obama wanted to destroy America. That was his whole purpose. And he's still the real president pulling Biden's strings. It's his third term. And he's the real reason that America is being destroyed, which of course is laughable in the grand scheme of things. Obama is a puppet like all the other puppets. But you can see why they would associate him with this film along those lines, thinking all those moves ahead about how the propaganda would function after it was released. And the things in the film start becoming a reality, at least in some shape or form, in the real world. I do remember there being something to the 1619 date as it related to White Lion. I think that was in relationship to slavery. And again, just what I was speaking on, you can see how that would be a nice red herring to put in here that would lead people down the wrong trail as it relates to the symbolism that's going on. Especially since this was a Netflix release and they generally have a specific formula that is in all of their films, propaganda-wise. The only other thing I can think of is, I believe the Magna Carta was signed in 1215, or at least they say that, and maybe as it relates to digital time, they're kind of saying, hey, leave the world behind. 1215 was sort of the birth of normal people having actual rights, but we're going back to you guys being serfs and not having those rights anymore. So just leave 1215 behind and all those other ideas, because the clock is stuck at 1215 digitally because of the cyber attack. And you can see that in one of the coming scenes where GH finds a watch that's analog on the beach and it says it's 1 o'clock. And that scene is presumably happening at the exact same time that this scene is, where it's 12:15. Meaning time has stopped in the digital world because of this cyber attack. And I think that definitely relates to the larger quantum leap ideas about sending consciousness into a different time. The Great Reset, where the old time doesn't apply anymore. We're leaving that behind too. So I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. That's really all that stuck out to me with these scenes. Most importantly, though, it's the 1215 Wonka connection, I think. And then this is a scene a little later on where all the Teslas, which connects Elon Musk and X into all of this as well, jam up the freeway entrances and exits. And at the same time, there's this bridge on fire imagery, which relates back to the White Lion and the cargo ship that crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge and the upside down American flag, and how that event took place, coincidentally, quote unquote, right after a lunar eclipse that is tied into Donald Trump, the Moonchild, as he relates to the Great American Eclipse and the ritual destruction of America, which is what is literally being shown in this film. Very interesting that bridges are on fire here. Oh, this is back to that scene right before they see the flamingos, which I just thought was funny how it's very clearly made to resemble a pyramid up here. And view this however you want, a monolith, a twin tower, just very clearly the house and the chimney, but lighted and shown in a way where this really looks like the Great Pyramid at Giza. Which gets at all of the Egyptian stuff surrounding this eclipse, how NASA is naming everything associated with it along those lines. The APEP rockets that they're going to shoot into the sky to get readings at the same time that the eclipse is going on April 8, 2024, coinciding with the OSIRIS APEP probe that's trying to learn about the Apophis asteroid eventually, and how that all related to the Utah monolith right before the December 14th, 2020 eclipse, and how that related to the mRNA vaccine and Donald Trump again in the midpoint between the 2017 and 2024 eclipses. And then also the resonance to Egypt in general and the 2027-2034 eclipses that come after these two in America. And how that will relate to the Messiah programming. I should say, while I'm on the subject, there's a lot of fear-mongering going on with that NASA APEP mission where they're going to launch the 3 rockets as the eclipse is going on. But they did the same thing during the last eclipse and took readings, and they're going to compare what they got in the 2017 eclipse to this eclipse. So yes, very ominously named, but also simultaneously, it's something they did already. So I wouldn't read too much into it other than along symbolic lines. Oh, and then of course, there's the very overt reference to Donnie Darko. That little girl keeps staring into the woods like Donnie Darko. No accident that Donnie Darko, the film, is referenced in Leave the World Behind, given its association with Donald Trump, the Moonchild, and the end of the world, quote unquote. And oh, by the way, Donnie Darko is set on October 2nd, 1988, and that solar eclipse is coming on October 2nd, 2024, a month before the next American election. So Donnie Darko started on October 2nd, the same day as the next solar eclipse, right before the United States election that will involve Donald Trump and his potential resurrection, because that eclipse goes through Easter Island, evoking that resonance of resurrection as it relates to him and then in general, their version of the Messiah programming. Speaking of eclipses, this is the actual imagery that is put into the film regarding the lunar eclipse that they portray, which I've shown before, so I won't go too much into. Oh yeah, so this is the scene right after they show that eclipse. And this imagery is fascinating. This is a very clear, intentional scene where Julia Roberts' head, who remember was in an episode of Friends, the one after the Super Bowl, and dated Matthew Perry, the Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you know about all of the Pittsburgh Steelers stuff as it relates to Heinz Field and The Dark Knight Rises. But Kevin Bacon's character in this movie is wearing a Dallas Cowboys hat, America's team, which ties Leave the World Behind and Dark Knight Rises together through Julia Roberts, who dated Matthew Perry, who had all of that Batman resonance to his ritual sacrifice and all of the water resonance dying in the hot tub. And then the water resonance back to the moon and the eclipse that they just showed. In the context of all of that, you have this image where a glass of water is sideways from our perspective, and her head is optically in the glass. Out of her body almost. I get the idea like drink up in terms of our subconscious programming, which will put you into this glass of water. We will literally quantum leap your consciousness into something else and control it in this way. So drink up. I don't know, something along those lines is going on here. And then the very next sequence after the eclipse and that glass of water is Archie's teeth falling out. But after they show her head in the glass of water and his teeth falling out, the original image from the beginning of the water is just way different and out of control now. The waves are huge and crashing. And that is the subconscious link, the pull that this programming has on the water in our bodies, right? It's more and more out of control at this point in the film. in terms of the plot, as I was just alluding to, yeah, it's getting crazier and crazier for them, but we're along for the ride in a subconscious way. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice, so I'm going to have to end this soon. This is that line I was talking about where Kevin Bacon says it's not that dissimilar to what happened in Cuba a while back, and then he's wearing the Dallas Cowboys hat that I was also alluding to. Oh, and then this is the scene where all the deer are staring at Julia Roberts' character and the other character. And they show her here going nuts in response to the programming, subconsciously speaking, that these deer represent. This is what I was getting at earlier as well. The scene where Julia Roberts is going crazy and the other character is going crazy in response to these deer just staring at them is constantly going back and forth with this scene where you have two characters pointing guns at each other under the American flag. And if you relate that deer symbolism back to the animals trying to tell you something in the context of these great American eclipses and the ritual destruction of America, well, they're showing you here what that programming does to people. It gets them to pull guns on each other in the context of the ritual destruction of America. Like I said, it could be more metaphorical in terms of quote-unquote civil war, or it could devolve into something more literal like this. It just depends what they have in the script along those lines. But it's very obvious as they show these deer just staring at the characters, given all of those deer towns that the eclipse will pass through, that it's relating to this great American eclipse symbolism in the context of the destruction of the United States of America, whether that's metaphorical or literal. I mean, it will always eventually be literal, but just how we get there. That's what I mean, whether it's more metaphorical or literal. And then this is the mushroom cloud that they show right at the end of the film, going back to that nuclear theme that's kind of permeating all of this stuff. This nuclear explosion theme. All throughout Christopher Nolan's stuff, and how he relates into this, and it's in Leave the World Behind here, and I'm sure many other places. I'm just focusing on two specific aspects of it. Oh, and then as I got into, in a prior video, this is the house where the bunker is, that she watches the last episode of Friends in, and it has this Masonic symbolism, but also it's the thorns, and that's the name of the main character in the Omen films, and there's a new Omen film coming out in a couple days now on April 5th, as it relates to the omen that is all of this stuff, according to them, right? Elevated radiation levels detected near multiple population centers. That same theme associated with nuclear weapons. Okay, my voice can't really take much more of this for whatever reason I'm struggling today, so I will end it here. Just remembering the most obvious part of all of this, where there's the scene and the light from the door opens and hits the path of the two eclipses, evoking all of this great American eclipse imagery in terms of the subconscious programming that relates to the ritual destruction of America or the great American eclipse.